You're about to hear the recorded audio diaries of Michael Swaim, Adam Ganzer, and Abe Epperson, transmitted to you from another dimension through the wonder of podcast technology. Lost in the multiverse, they have to dig into a different piece of multiversal fiction each episode, in the hopes of finally discovering a way back to their reality. How do they know this isn't their reality? Because one of them is being a real asshole. Will our heroes ever make it home, or will they inadvertently explore our obsession with multiverses, alternate timelines, and parallel worlds, and tie it all into a conversation about postmodern art, pop culture, and what it means to be a human right now? This is Escape from the Multicurse.
You know, it'd be a funny asshole bit. I'm not this. If you just didn't have the right mic on, you were recording out of the wrong mic. You're doing a regular bit, but it's like the mic, you're off mic. That is a funny bit to me.
So your bit is to be unprofessional, to be a non-professional.
Is that not a good bit?
Couldn't you just do that bit in post? Could you not just add a filter and be done?
Oh, that's a good idea.
You know what I think is a really good bit? To have like bad opinions, just to come out hot with bad opinions.
It'd be very difficult.
I briefly considered my asshole bit being, what if I was just cut and dried an asshole? Like I'm a mean
You're just
who has bad opinions.
Not very nice person.
Yeah.
And then
I'll probably do that
people
someday.
are like, I don't like that Abe Epperson. He's got bad opinions. I can be like, it was a bit.
That was when I was an asshole.
It was a goof.
Normally, I'm funny and sweet.
Yeah, well, you hear yuck yucks going, so you know where you are.
Oh.
This is Escape from the Multicurse. Wow! We are three weary travelers trying to scale the universes. I'm Abe Epperson.
I'm Adam Ganzer.
Whoa!
And I'm second.
Sorry.
Whoa.
Did we know? Is it alphabetical? Should we codify that? So
No.
it's not impulse
It's a
driven?
rule.
It's not necessary to
We'll
codify.
definitely remember it if we make
It
a
is
rule
not.
about it.
There is no ego here. We are not both rushing at an open door frame, cramming through it simultaneously. It's simply that we don't care. So I'm like, all right, okay, that's Adam Ganzer. I'm Michael Swaim, the third one, and
Fucking nailing it, guys.
we're basically
I'll go
doing
fourth. I'll go fourth. I don't care.
We're doing the shell game of who's the asshole right now. We're hiding.
Yeah, we're just eyeing each other like which one of us is gonna fuck
the
up this episode.
Every one
never
of these
guess.
episodes
Boy,
is an
howdy.
emotional standoff. Like we just have guns
It
to each
really
other's
does
heads.
feel that way.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, it feels that way sometimes.
I know.
I love you guys to death, but man, it's tough sometimes.
Yeah. Also, speaking of assholes, today's dimension / movie that we're covering is Groundhog Day, and I had forgotten how much of a prick this character is. Phil Connors
For, like,
is
a
a real
whole movie.
prick for a pretty long time. You know,
Yeah, that's kind of the point, right?
it's definitely the point, but I think it was more lovable
Yes.
in its time than it is now, right?
Dude, 80s 90s comedy, especially this group, you know,
Yeah.
the Dan Aykroyds and whatnot. Like, you go back and you watch some of those films and you're like, oh, the joke is that they are just pricks to
just
everyone.
not a nice person at all.
Yeah.
Anyway, now we do the multi-map, right?
Yeah, let's jump into format.
Yeah.
Which means that we are going to just take a moment and discuss how this is unique in multiverse stories. 1993's Groundhog Day. Do you have any thoughts? Anybody? I have some.
I do,
Never.
but I don't need to go first. I don't need to run first to the door jam again.
I do.
Okay, great. Good.
just to get move
EGS.
us
It
along.
would be him alphabetically anyway. I think
He's
it's
just
right.
gonna do this the whole time, isn't he? So it's a very standard vanilla time loop, right? The goal is self-improvement in this one, but instead of like Star Trek and other sci-fi, which like usually I guess there's maybe a fantasy version of this, like Siddhartha. No, I don't know, but like Star Trek or whatnot, they did this before, right? Where it's like save the Enterprise by making the right decisions. And then later we had things like Edge of Tomorrow, which is called like war. You know, people call it jokingly Groundhog Day in war. That's like about winning a war. But in the winning combo move, we typically show time loop stories accomplish a goal by like adjusting some form of causality in the system. This movie is still that. In fact, the lesson though is that's stupid to attempt to do that selfishly. And so the way he goes about it is by trying everything until he basically has no more selfish wants, and therefore just gets the most gratification from bringing joy to people. And that's when he unlocks it, which is, I guess, unique. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I love that about this movie. This is like one of the greatest movies for tracking a character's growth, which, you know, is a very screenwriter way to think about movies, but it's basically what every movie really is like, you know, your protagonist wants a thing and then they grow some to get it. Because if they don't grow, it tends to be a bit of a boring movie. Not always. There are, you know, exceptions to it, like movies that purposefully make the objective very surface level and shorten the length of time. You know, then we start to not care as much about personal growth. This movie is a fantastic exploration of that, and I think fundamentally one of the reasons why we care about stories is charting personal growth. That's kind of what narrative is. I just think the idea that it takes this long to empty yourself of narcissism is kind of a profound message from a movie, especially from like kind of a run-of-the-mill comedy. And I only mean run-of-the-mill in the sense that like that's all this pretended to be when it came out. Is, you know, it's just a comedy movie with Bill Murray. You've seen them before. This time he's a weatherman. You know what I mean? It's not like it's deceptive in its Siddharthan, you know, rhythms here. And I love it for that. Like, it's a really cool meditation on what it means to be a good person. And I do enjoy the idea that all these people exist in all these universes, and there's one guy that figured it out, you know, and that one guy that figured it out, like the idea of enlightenment is present in the sense that he's not stuck in the same reality, right? Like, it's very Buddhist in that way, and I kind of love that about it. Yeah, it's really great. I have a lot of nostalgia for this film. I've seen it about 8,000 times, like we were talking about before we started recording. So it's a little hard to see it from the eyes of like, what if I'd never seen it? But it's kind of a cool like Buddhist multiverse on when you abstract it out into space-time a bit. And I like that about it. That's my hot take.
I fucked every way that I go. I have so many. Your guys already have sparked a bunch of interesting things in my brain that I want to say, but everything gets subsumed by whatever asshole bit you have to do. Plus, I already forgot to do it at the beginning, so now it's like there's no way to launch into it. So I have to say we're beginning the asshole bit now. Hello, fellows. It's me, Michael, with an affect I think you'll like. I'll have to rhyme like Dr. Seuss. How you pronounce it, that's your choice. But when you podcast with your vassals, someone has to be the asshole. They might even pen an opening verse, but that's all the time they had to rehearse. So then they have to rhyme on their own, and things slow down like they do when you bone off the top of their head. It's gonna be great. Lactate, masturbate.
Yep.
Okay, what about... I have a point, and I'll get it out by bending the joint that's at my jaw and say Groundhog Day uses the multiverse as a classic power fantasy in the sense that we all say, if I could do that again, I'd do it way better. I'm looking at you, Ned Ryerson.
Bing.
But my issue with it, which the original author points out, is that it scrupulously whitewashes all the stuff that would definitely come about, which is not to be grim, but just confront human nature. He never corners a girl and tries to rape her, for example, or commits a federal crime, then absolves himself by going back in time, or contends with the true nature of nihilism, meaning that there's no morality. And that's the point I made with finality.
I am so excited.
Thank God for this bit that you've chosen to punish yourself with.
Terrible. Someone had to do it.
Why did you do it?
Why this is the most excited I've ever been.
Me would be the one to do it sensibly.
Well, I couldn't do what you just did. I'm too much of a dum-dum with brain rot, man. Like I am in awe of you even having the gall to attempt this.
I'm excited about this discount Shakespeare we're going to get today. I'm very excited about it. I don't know
There's
why you
gonna
would
be
do
one
this.
that's gonna just be straight up bars, and I'm not gonna know what to do with myself. Like this movie, sometimes straight up bars, other times not great.
Actually,
Fun point. Got to mention.
Hot take I want to say, but go ahead.
Harold Ramis originally had Tom Hanks in contention, as well as several other Hollywood nice guys, and settled on Murray specifically because of what I despise about him, which is that he also comes off legit as an asshole most of the time. Period. That's it.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and sometimes that's a crime. You're not off in the Buddhism. I did a little research on my computer.
Ooh, we have those?
And so Harold Ramis married Erica Mann in 1989.
Yeah.
And she had a Buddhist upbringing.
Yeah.
And he's mentioned in interviews how much it influenced his philosophies.
Oh,
Like,
you can
he grew
tell.
up Jewish, but like this is him. This is literally a movie. Who's like, I want to make a movie that's comes from my relationship with my wife and my newfound kind of worldview. And it does talk a lot about divinity. Like, it's not just a Buddhist movie. Like, there is, like, it. That's what makes this movie kind of great. Is that it kind of is just. It doesn't seek to explain itself. It just does stuff, and it's like, take it or leave it. One of the things that I noticed this time, like, it starts on clouds, which of course works because he's literally a weatherman. But it also is like a symbol of divinity, which, you know, is multiple times in the movie. Like, Murray later says, like, I make the weather, or he's like, I am a god. But there definitely is a Buddhist slant on this because, like, with just the main plot, we kind of get this feeling that desire is suffering, right?
Well, I mean, so we should pass into whatever the segment is that we debate each other.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And this is called Verses on Verses, where we just rant. This is the episode until the end.
Although if attachment is the root of all suffering, you have to admit we overlaid it with our thing, which is the attachment of a monogamous cishet relationship is the best thing that you can hope for in this situationship.
Yeah, that's right. I think that is.
So you are attached to that one thing, which is your love prize.
Well, I think the movie's trying to say that he only becomes worthy of her when he no longer centers his identity around her, right? Instead, he centers his identity on literally everybody else.
Correct.
And so then she chooses
Or I think
him.
that's what they're attempting.
Yeah, that's what they're trying to say. I mean, you know, it's still a movie, so it's kind of limited. I want to talk a lot about the Buddhist thing, so maybe let's do that first. I had another idea that I wanted to discuss, but
we got time.
You ever read Siddhartha?
Yeah.
So
hence my reference of it earlier in the podcast, for sure.
Well, Siddhartha is also, you know, the founder of Buddhism, but the book Siddhartha,
Hermann Hesse, is that right?
Yes, by Hermann Hesse, kind of goes through this like fictionalized journey of the Buddha, and it's this is a little bit like reverse order, but essentially like it's a pretty good map of the emotional arc that Bill Murray goes on here. Like you know, he goes on sort of a hedonistic, self-indulgent piece. Then he goes into this sort of, I'll call it asceticism. It's still narcissism ultimately, but this kind of ascetic journey to perfectly manipulate what he wants out of the world to come his way, and that doesn't happen either. And then he has to like give up.
Right.
And like this movie has some really dark lows. Like the suicide montage is pretty dark.
Yeah.
Right? Like it gets real, man, in a way that you don't expect for a comedy film.
There's a montage of Andie MacDowell. This is before the midpoint or like the darkest hour. But there's a montage of Andie MacDowell slapping Bill Murray, right?
So good.
Set to music.
Yeah.
And then that music turns into this is the first time I've noticed it, and I've seen this movie like 900 times. It turns into a saxophone quote of My Way by Sinatra.
Yes, it's perfect.
I did it my way.
As he walks by the
I
ice
never
sculptures.
noticed that. And and that is awesome. That is really awesome because I also love the ice sculpture aspect of it because it represents chiseling away from a block. and also something that I figure would be pretty zen to do, like little simple cuts over and over and over.
Well, because ice inevitably melts,
and it
so it's
doesn't last.
intangible, which
Right.
they want to
exactly
take as an
So
aspect of
it's-
themselves. I gotta interrupt just to say that, just to stump for Danny Rubin, the guy
Mhm.
who sat down with the idea like as if he were Jeffrey Toobin and whipped out his hog, but in the sense of creativity, and wrote Groundhog Day's screenplay originally.
Wow.
Rubin, of course, has said he's grateful for the experience, doesn't have to fret about money and other things that make you delirious, but also that he's mildly disappointed that the script was so radically changed to be sort of a less disjointed, more condensed 4-quadrant fun family love romp instead of his script, which was a very dark tromp into the deep woods of human temptation and what would you do with this wealth of information about everything that's going to happen second by second. Is that the kind of power with which the human soul can reckon? And even though I've seen this movie ad nauseum and love it, I think that story sounds more true to the Buddhismness of it.
I don't know.
This is magic, by the way.
Because Siddhartha,
don't want
the
to talk.
book, absolutely deals with fundamental, like, base impulses.
Yeah.
Whereas this does it through the lens of love equals enlightenment, which to me is just a reduction. Fuck. Impulses. Damn it. Well, I thought I would have fallen off before now. So, all right, that's one.
Like I want,
That's what
I want
counted.
to just be quiet, but also I know he needs breaks. Like,
Well,
Knee breaks.
go to
But
the-
yeah. I guess I'm saying, do you guys think it could have had more heft, or would that have not been as good a movie if they
I
even
don't
tried
think
to?
we-
Because also, okay, I'll go back to Remy, I swear, but just also, Harold Ramis has said that originally they tried to write a version where he was trapped there for 10,000 years, and it took these deep philosophical looks at what that would actually do to the human mind, and then they dialed it down to, no, it takes like 10 years, and he goes from being Scrooge to being nice, and let's just keep it simple.
yeah.
Do you think that was
Reuben-
the smart money?
I do.
Because the movie's funny
That's the Reuben script. The Reuben script is a lot darker.
and more epic, which reminds me more of Siddhartha, which is why I injected.
Right.
And
Or-
about his loneliness. Yeah.
I think that we would not remember the movie the way we remember this movie, like as a piece of cultural.
That would be like Into the Void, something.
yeah, as a piece of
About
cultural
which I'd be
tableau. Ramis was right. This movie has endured,
Yeah.
I think, because he targeted it correctly, and it was a really good idea. You know, like it's
It is a
really,
good idea.
really good idea. I mean, we keep doing it. That's how good of an idea it is. I think setting it in Punxsutawney among a people that are very, I think that the audience has a stereotype about them being sort of small town and goofy, and then wanting to go into this sort of dark, scream into the void version of it. It's like, that's not really what I want out of that movie. You know, it might be what I want
Yeah.
out of a novel or some deeper exploration of the human condition, but do I want him to be stuck in this small town for that? That doesn't make sense to me.
Also, for the record, Danny Rubin openly says that he lifted the idea from an old short story called Christmas Every Day. Which
That makes
Oh,
sense.
interesting. In another interview, he argued that when he created the story, he was reading Anne Rice's The Vampire Lestat.
The point is, I think as pertinent to this podcast, time loops stories have probably been with us since before we were writing stories down. Like, I bet campfire stories involve time loops, right?
I don't know. Have they?
It seems like a story you would quickly stumble upon.
The fact that it's Groundhog Day, also Reuben was like, I just pointed at a calendar and that was the nearest one.
That's funny.
And I was like, fuck that, because it's the perfect holiday,
Sure.
because it's literally a tradition steeped in prophecy, which is
Yeah.
his superpower.
Yeah.
Like, it's so obviously the best holiday for that to me. I don't know.
I think,
it's very
I mean,
interesting.
it's like you hear that The Sixth Sense had 4 drafts where, you know, Bruce Willis wasn't a ghost.
Right. And
It's
you're
like,
like,
what the fuck is that?
What are those other things?
yeah, what's that like? I completely believe that this guy stumbled on some things that seem so obvious and seminal now. Like, I believe that. I do think that Buddhism is a difficult thing to make into an entertaining movie if it doesn't have a little levity added to, at least for an American audience, if there's no levity added to it, because it's a very serious contemplation about what life's about. You know, and that's we've seen a lot of movies that try to do that, not even just from Buddhist point of view, but like, how about every Terrence Malick film? You know what I mean? Or like tons and tons of movies that are meditative in that way or serious in that way, and I just think they have a tendency not to stick. You know, the audience tends to sort of shrug them off because it's too heavy of a burden to shoulder.
You think this movie actually sticks with people as like an important statement on morality and philosophy? I feel like it sticks with people as a fun romantic comedy.
I think they absorb it more. I do, because we went right to that.
That's a shame. Because this is like a fairy tale version of... This is like a commercial jingle version of Buddhism. This is not a real...
It's a parable.
Exploration of Buddhism, yeah.
I think we're minimizing a little bit the impact this movie had culturally. I think everybody can tell.
I feel like we're minimizing all the times this story already occurred in 50s and 60s sci-fi short stories, but...
That people didn't read, probably.
I feel like we're shining a lot on its originality, and that's not what's amazing about it to me, because... I don't know. I'll just say, as the premise of this podcast, completely abandon the bit, as the premise of this podcast is predicated on, I guess that doesn't matter. I feel like I've read about multiverse and time loop stories since time immemorial, long before Groundhog Day. It feels weirdly arbitrary to lay that at the feet of Groundhog Day to me.
Well, I wasn't necessarily saying that it was meaningful because it created this concept. I can accept that there are sci-fi short stories out there that came up with it first. I can call this the Thomas.
Well, Buddhism came up with it first, as far as I'm aware. Right. But a lot of sci-fi people ripped off the idea of you learn and then you gain enlightenment. Right? I mean, that is a thing.
Okay, I can accept that. It's just that it's a pretty good package for it. If
I think it's the first comedy version,
right?
As far as I'm aware, yeah.
If all stories are in some ways archetypally, packaging a worldview that we already know into a parable form that makes it palatable and refreshes it for us, I think this film deserves more credit than being just sort of a fun comedy for doing that. Because I feel like we all believe that about stories, right? That most stories are regurgitating known and believed truths, not necessarily enlightening new ones.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. I think good stories remind us of stuff that we forgot
believe.
that we already knew. Yeah. And we're like, oh, that's right. I do think that.
Yeah.
I do think it's important to rhyme. And then later I forget that. But then on time, I come back with a new passion and I say everything will rhyme after a fashion.
Oh, good.
Yes.
I'm so glad. I have a thought experiment that is fun if we don't mind moving off the Buddhist point much. I like to think of time loop movies as multiverses. And I feel like if I worked really hard, I could make a proof why they are. I think when you think of this as a multiverse and as one man sort of jumping between different multiverses, as a thought experiment of this as a multiverse, it's a fun way to think about the actual human cost of selfishness.
Yeah.
Which is part of what I think multiverses are about, is sort of extrapolating out into infinity. What is it like? A multiverse like this being crafted in such a way that the protagonist of it retains the memories of the other universes that they were participant in. I think that the retaining the memories thing is a cognitive link that suggests a multiverse to me, because it's not possible to reverse time without losing everything that happened. That's what this is like, the basis of the proof. And I think we talked about this in the Butterfly Effect, which is why I do think time loop movies are serving the same narrative function in some ways as multiverses. Yeah. In that they are extrapolations out into infinity, and then what does it mean about the human power, human experience, and so on, right? So it's the same in that way. And again, the cost of human suffering that selfishness, one man's selfishness, does is profound. That's maybe one reason why I'm so like intrigued by this movie on a philosophical level, even if probably most people that watch it don't care, Mike. I think you're right about that. But like this guy, when the guardrails are taken off, like who knows what scenes we didn't see?
Oh yeah,
You know, like
Yeah.
who? Like
that's Palm Springs with Andy Samberg. If
Right.
you've seen that as a darker version of this,
right? He did everything. I fundamentally believe that just from what I did see, he did everything.
I think so.
You know, everything
I
there
think
is
he
to
lived
do.
every version of the human animal in its darkness and in its brightness, and we just focus on the brightness in the movie. That's all, with a little bit of
I
dark.
think the chronology of his self-eradication is important, though. Like, I think the movie's right about that. That, like, it really took him that long to get to a place where he was willing not to be self-centered anymore. Like, I believe that. I think I think what makes it a movie that's interesting to me. Like, that, like, he literally would rather die than live for other people's benefit and at the exclusion of his own. You know, like, that
Right.
occurs to him first. And I think that's amazing.
It's funny to me also because like I also do repetitions of things just for the comfort of them, and I'm sure he did that as well.
Yeah.
Like he watched a movie. It's not like he's never going to watch that movie again. He might like that movie, and so he spent 60,000 years watching a movie or something. You know, like there's something that he did that's some freak shit. That we're like,
for
I
sure.
wouldn't do that. You
For
know,
sure.
like even if you push me to the farthest reaches of the human morality, I wouldn't do that.
God knows what
He probably did
strange
that.
goings on when it took place between him and Ryerson at night. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like-
exactly.
like, who
And
knows?
well, it's interesting you mentioned this as kind of like a multiverse. I definitely still think it's like, obviously it is a time loop in terms of like what it's
what it purports
literally
to be.
doing, but
Yeah.
but what you're arguing about how multiverses and time loops kind of they're like, it's interesting to me because multiverse stories always have been, to me, almost all of them are about your alternate potentials, and
Yeah.
that is kind of the same as a time loop because that's always about how you improve your potential
or
right?
maximize your
Usually have-
potential. Yeah.
or maximize. So it's like, while they're saying the same thing, the multiverse is often occupied with what could have been, whereas time loops are entirely focused on the present because the past and the future just don't exist. Which I think is an interesting, like, at least line in the sand to say there is a difference between the two of them. But I think it does boil down to what, if there was a more, for the audience, what is a more real reality? Like The Matrix or Narnia or something like that, versus what if reality became meaningless because everything becomes shades of the initial reality.
Well, he has that.
So in that way, they are the same.
And by the way, the screenwriter has a lot of flourish at pointing those things out in lines that you can't believe how obvious they are, and yet they feel like dialogue. Like, one thing is, like, when the first act finally ends, right? Which is, like, I think the moment they take off in the car, him and the two drunk guys, and he's sort of saying, like, you could do anything you want. Like, that's the moment where he embraces the idea and, like, now we're gonna do the movie. He has this great line, like, where he's like, you know, what do you do when everything turns, like, everything you do is pointless and everything becomes meaningless or something like that, but it's a little bit more casually said, and the drunk guy next to him goes, that about sums it up for me. And it's like, wow, like, you just summarized the theme of this movie in such a clear way, and like got away with it, you know?
Right.
Like, Chris
Yeah,
Nolan
yeah,
is
yeah.
like, a young Chris Nolan is watching this covetously, like, writing it down, you know, putting it in a Joker mouth.
That's in your trailer.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it's really great screenwriting in that way, I feel like.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny moments that, like, sometimes they caught me off guard. Like this one, I like when Phil steals the groundhog, and Andy McDowell is like, "Why would anyone steal a groundhog?" Chris Elliott is like, "I know why. He's a pervert," which is a fascinating answer because
Pervert,
like that's
yeah.
the first thing your mind goes
Yeah.
to, Chris Elliott.
Well, also,
Yeah, there's
they keep
good joke.
Chris Elliott has that great line, prima donnas, that he says a bunch of times, pretty much only in the first act, that really help us to get exactly the problem this character has. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And then there's that great scene where Phil Connors is like eating everything in front of Andy McDowell, and she's like, "Don't you worry about, you know, cholesterol or love handles or anything." And then she quotes that poem at him, and he says, "You think I'm doing this because I'm egocentric?" And she says, "I know you're egocentric. It's your defining characteristic." Which is such a screenwriter line, and it just like snuck in there. It's so great.
Your flaw that will be
Right.
You're gonna try to resolve.
They're so smart about that. Like, I love this on a screenplay level. Does that offend you, Mike? Are you offended by the obviousness of the screenplay?
Interesting, you should throw me the mic. Because, as you know, there's stuff about this show that I like, but also about which I have some qualms. And one is the difference between time loops and multiverses. In the sense that I think one is about changing the past to affect the future, and one is about taking every possibility and assembling them by suture until they represent a simultaneity of happening. And a time loop is more like, I'm God and I can just do a snapping of my fingers and things will comport to what I want, as we see with Bill Murray becoming godlike and then recanting on it and giving up his power in order to grow as a person. But it's hard to describe in poetry, so I'm gonna demur, son.
I
love that.
Are you serious? Like, you just made a great point while trying to rhyme. Anyway, can't get over it. I agree with a lot of what you said. I do think that time loops is God. I think all of this is God. Like, it's having a cheat code to a higher meaning or purpose is like Matrix, right? It's like, there's a new reality and it gets you closer to the real thing. There's something real. It's
Sorry to not rhyme, but I never thought of the Matrix as a guy going like, oh, reality? My reality is so realer than your reality. Like, that is a very funny take.
Yeah.
This shit's not even real. My real shit's real.
That's why you take the steak, baby.
I'm having a hard time conceiving of a time loop movie that isn't essentially a crucible that the protagonist has to use and navigate just right to stop it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I agree with you that, like, it's about manipulating your circumstances in a way that a human being can't to exert control, but also it's where your circumstances are fixed in this like lab rat kind of way where you're not in control of them. You just have to learn how to run the race just right so that the outcome is what you want. You know, whereas multiverse tends to give a bigger potential to your actions and to your choices in a way where we actually, both of these formats tend to sort of end in the same place. Isn't it great that we're just these little people with these little lives instead of all this power that we had for, 2 hours, right?
I think multiverse show has wider range.
I agree.
But it can grant godlike power. Doctor Strange, for example, is to me the ideal postmodern multiverse, because it's basically an excuse to say, I have eaten all of art and can crap out the best, the worst, whatever I want at any time and put it into a pastiche. And I can even keep this neon demon god on a leash.
Oh, damn. I thought you were going to go with quiche. And I was like, look at my
Stacey
delicious
quiche?
quiche.
And yes, it's
Underrated.
like in the larger network of universe, because this is the problem with Marvel, right? Is like, so where does their multiverse end? And I would argue,
Nowhere.
Yeah, that's the
It's
problem.
nothing and
So
everything.
that's why
Yeah.
it's not doing the same thing in some ways that any self-contained story about the multiverse is doing. Because like Marvel is not one movie. Marvel is an entertainment experience across an infinite number of fucking movies and universes, which is to say Marvel has the ultimate Groundhog Day problem where like how nothing that you do matters, nothing actually changes anything, nothing the characters do means anything, and how can we get this to stop? You know what I mean? Like, it's the same fucking problem.
That's true. That's most of time
Everything
loop
is
stories.
everything is everything until you're bored of it. Oh
Like-
no, now what do we
Right.
do?
I'm trying to think of, except for this at the end, like the last 10 minutes of this movie, I'm trying to think of a time loop story that isn't just like the equivalent of in a like fighting game, I did the perfect combo, right? You're going for the perfect run.
This
you know?
movie also has a perfect run.
The end of Doctor Strange, which is thoroughly multiversal, actually uses a time loop as the fortune reversal of whatever that demon's name is. You know what I mean? But like they cap off a multiverse with a time loop inside itself. It's insane.
That's why Marvel is the best. No,
It's everything and nothing. Yeah.
It's everything. That's why it's trying to absorb all realities, which I think is, when I think you cut down to it, that is the similarity between multiverse and time loops. I don't think they're the same thing, but I do think that in the end, they're trying to say, but what if there was a real? And you could control it and pick the right choices so that you win. Like, it's always just about winning.
What if the universe was bigger and more meaningful than it seems to you, and you were in charge of it?
What does the multiverse offer you? What does a time loop offer you? Well, you can use the system against itself.
I think this niche kind is also always about youth and the idea that if I could go back with the wisdom I have now, I'd take this shit through the roof. And, because as we grow, we suffer pain and it reveals more truth. But then we realize we're old already, and I wish I could do more with that stoof.
I enjoy the horrendous disfigured rhymes that you do more than the good ones.
It's not a power fantasy; it's a wisdom fantasy. I think that is a genre of story that we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm so wise that if I still had a young body, I could really fuck up Ned Ryerson's day to the extreme.
But isn't that power, though? Isn't wisdom a form of power?
Wisdom,
okay,
I guess.
We all agree. We all agree.
Yes, unless you're a Zelda fan, in which case they're
charisma,
very distinctly
all the
separated.
Attributes have their own appeal.
Yeah. No, wisdom is absolutely
endurance.
The power of story, right? Like internalizing
foresight,
morals across the change of a character is wisdom, right? So that makes sense to me. Do you feel like? Well, so like I'm trying to think of a time loop movie where the protagonist had any powers that were not normal human powers other than the time loop. They don't, right? Like I think that's
well,
key
that's
to
what
it.
I mean or maybe this doesn't fit your definition, but that's why rhyming suspended. That's why I brought up the ending of Doctor Strange, because technically he's in a time loop and is also magic and Jesus and an astronaut.
Right.
So they
we're
kind of
starting to
piled
have
it all
those.
on.
Yeah, there's a movie called Boss Level that came out in 2020 that is a time loop that also he is the greatest assassin in the world.
They're doing roguelite ones too now, where you're a time loop, but you can slightly improve your situation every loop.
Yep.
It's getting fucked with as everything.
That's right. Roguelites are
everything
basically time loop narratives when they're narrative.
Kind of.
Right.
And they also mimic the idea of slowly improving yourself until you're finally enlightened.
Right. We could cover Hades on this show.
We can and we will, and we are now.
Yeah. Anyway,
we are now.
Yeah, that's just intriguing to me. Mike, were you aware of the sci-fi short story? Like, did you read a bunch of those short stories before you saw Groundhog Day?
As someone who grew up reading Golden Age sci-fi, like an addict, I gotta say, my guy, yes, I do think a little of the sheen was off when I first saw Groundhog Day, and it reminded me of stuff to which my cap I had already doffed. Yes, I had encountered time loops before, and that's not what struck me about this movie, I think, so much for that reason. I was more struck by Bill Murray as the funniest actor alive, is how I felt at the time.
How do you feel now about that? Because I do want to talk about Bill Murray now.
Oh, that's also hard to say in rhyme, because I have a nuanced, complicated... Everything I learn about him in person, I don't respect his methodology. Yeah. I don't like the way he works or treats other people. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the work we got out of him is worth the way he acts. But I still think his movies are funny. But then also, comedy is so disposable that I think we enshrine it too much. Meaning, like, I go watch Stripes now, and I go, that's not that funny, because it's dated now. So, like, was it worth it to be mean to everyone? I don't think it was, but that's kind of where I land on
intriguingly, this movie, I feel like out of all of his movies, is one of the most enduring comedies.
Probably his best, most important film that I can think of.
And it might be in part because the character that he's playing is closer to what I've understood is who he is. Right? Like in a strange...
Well, yeah, that's why Raimi ended up landing on, and he said he would often start directing him and he would interrupt him and just be like, should I be nice Bill Murray or mean Bill Murray? And he goes, mean for this scene. And he goes, great. And he would just do it. And I understand that that's a whirlwind talent that can do that and just ad lib. But I like control and I like professionalism and I like people who show up to be a team player and not to fuck around with the day.
I agree with that. And yet there are scenes here that are very clearly improved by that nonsense.
Yeah.
Like,
he's a great writer on his feet.
One scene that really struck me this time when I was watching it, like, so they have this scene in a van when they're on their way to Punxsutawney, right? Like, so this is like the setup of the movie, which almost nobody remembers. So they're on their way, and this is like the first time we've kind of seen Bill Murray and Rita together, and he's such a fucking prick to her, like, for no reason, you know? Like, and then you could tell that he didn't feel like Bill Murray didn't feel good about it. So he added like 3 extra jokes at the end that sort of softened what he did. And they were really like, yeah, we did need that. Like this was a moment where the character could have fallen off the rails and been hateable.
Totally unrelatable.
Yeah, like the blood sausage line and stuff, you know, and then he's like, I have some blood sausage, would you like? You know what I mean? Like,
even when he's doing the, you know, terrible, like, I'm going to do intel on Andy McDowell, which is that's a whole thing we can talk about. But like he can't help himself, like, fuck his own timeline. Like, he has to relive a day because he like says like, oh, French poetry is what you studied. What a waste of time. It's like your knee-jerk reaction is honestly to be a like giant red flag all the time.
Well, I mean, just the way that he thinks love works is pretty profound in a dark way. And I really enjoyed forgive me, there's just this line is like a very true line, even though it's a very movie line, which is she's like I could never be with someone like you because you'll never love anybody but yourself. And then he says, that's not true. I don't even like myself. And it's this like, wow,
I remember that
really is what's happening here. And he was, and like, I believe he would have said it here, you know? Anyway, I love this screenplay, if that's not clear.
Well, I had the rhyme and now I just have the idea. What point is the idea without the rhyme? I think it's fitting that we brought up butterfly effect because obviously events in time connect. But I think the makers of that film would say it doesn't matter how many times you relive a single day. For 10 years or 10,000, whatever you do is affected so randomly on a level that's so minute that you can't actually predict outcomes even an inch in front of you. And I don't know which view's correct, and I wonder if either of you do.
Well, I think that's why.
Just meaning, I guess, like, if you really did time loop, I don't actually know who's correct. Butterfly effect, which states it doesn't matter. It like all the wisdom you could bring to bear is nothing in the face of how much you don't know and how much incomprehensibility there is in the universe. And Groundhog Day says, no, you'd figure it out. You'd get pretty good. And I wonder which is closer to the truth.
I definitely butterfly effect. I think.
You think?
Yeah, because like how we barely even understand like how our own bodies work. You know, like we don't fully understand how our own bodies work. Like or like
what I always wonder, what about the day he says word for word the same thing to Ned Ryerson, but Ned answers differently, and then he goes, "Wait, well, I said the same thing word for word. Why do you answer differently?" Yeah.
Right, like and like the idea that you could micromanage reality, no matter how small of a pool you were playing in, to make it work for you is absurd. And like most legitimate art pieces understand that about the power fantasy, which is why they always land on it's better to be satisfied with your lot in life, you know, like it's very Ecclesiastes, or like
because it's the best you're gonna do.
Well, also Bruce Almighty is a fun thought experiment in this direction, right? Where like Jim Carrey becomes God, and the movie ends in this very like, yeah, maybe I don't really understand how to be God. maybe it's just too big of a job for me. And it's like, yeah,
The
of
greatest
course.
instance of humility Jim Carrey
Right.
ever evinced.
I guess I'm not God.
All right, I guess I'm not
Yeah.
God. Did you see at the end of his documentary, though, the last line of his documentary about himself is he goes, Jesus Christ, Jim Carrey, JC, I don't know. That's
Yeah.
the end of his documentary.
His doc was fascinating.
It was
Did you hate it?
prima donna. It was very prima
interesting.
donna.
I mean, yes, but I also thought it was deeply honest for him. Like I didn't
Well,
in
this
his
is off
flaws.
topic, but on topic, if we're talking about flawed
Right.
comedians who are undeniably radically talented,
Right.
I just couldn't unsee the sequence where Jerry Lawler is begging him to please stop fucking with him
Yep.
between takes
Yep.
and going, I was friends with Andy Kaufman in real life. He didn't treat me like this.
Right.
And Jim Carrey goes,
Yeah. Well, he
and
did
I
this
go,
time. Yeah.
You're just a prick, dude. There's no call. It doesn't make you better at your job. You're not doing your job better because you're being mean to this man in your break time. It doesn't make you a genius. It makes you stupid. To me.
I think that's interesting on the point of Bill Murray.
Astoundingly talented. I cannot take anything away from Bill Murray or, their performances. That's not what I'm talking about at all. It's the balance again, right? But is professionalism, does it matter at all? If you're talented, can you do whatever the fuck you want? I argue no. Because there's other talented people not getting a shot out there.
Well, or even if you can, I think there is a question of should you be able to, right? Like,
Does it behoove society?
Yeah.
Do we actually owe you that because you
Yeah.
happen to have been born with a genius brain?
or
Maybe we do.
No,
I actually don't know the answer. I do value art highly. Well, like if I found out Beethoven murdered a bunch of people, would I be like, I would unwrite Beethoven music for there's a point where you're like, well, now this art belongs to humanity and we're just grateful that it exists. I don't know.
I just think it's a false
Do
equivalent.
comedies reach that? Yeah.
It's a false equivalency to say that that those acts have to be linked with that behavior. Like I don't think the behavior is a necessary product of his actions. Or
Right.
you know what I mean? Like
Unless he murdered to make his music, then you don't even have to really argue it.
no, yeah.
I wouldn't defend Beethoven. I mean, he's just a funny dog. It's not that
Yeah,
great.
you slobbered
Yes.
too much.
Yes, Abe.
Okay, I could argue why
Chaos.
this is on topic because I do think this is kind of what the
good.
movie's about.
Okay, great.
Which is interesting because it works so well for Murray being the face of it, right? Because it's fascinating to me that if you
The
read about the making of
Hurricane.
this over and over, Raimi says he was the perfect fit because he's Hurricane Murray. Like
Mhm.
Tom Hanks was too nice to play this character, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And so it's really on point that it's what the movie's about, right? The movie is about a dude also navigating how much am I allowed to just make it up as I go along and take what I want and get what I want versus how much
Yeah.
do I have to be a fucking human being for
That's
the
like
sake of other
Herzog
people?
Kinski's shit, dude. Like
Yeah.
it's like it is better that you guys hate each other.
Yeah.
I don't know how it worked, but it's fucking lightning in a bottle for the viewer at least.
I mean-
I agree entirely with Swaim's assessment of like how you should conduct yourself versus, like art being, is it worth it? I think well said, even though it was, shamefully unrhymed.
Yeah, even though the bit was
I'm
sacrificed.
sorry. Yeah.
Should be
but I
eradicated.
guess
Literally the
it's
hardest
like
thing.
the true darkness is as I sit here, I am thinking of pieces of art that I'm like, well, that
You
would be
defend
worth
it,
it.
yeah.
They could do some horrible shit and we would still keep that. Like seeing how far I would go.
Yeah, that's the
What if
question.
Hitler wrote and directed Hot Fuzz? No, I'd still probably delete Hot
Yeah,
Fuzz.
still delete Hot Fuzz.
Like all these matchups.
I mean, I guess you got to start with the bigs,
Right.
Hot Fuzz. Yep. Start right away.
Start right away with that.
Right,
First
or
one.
like the opposite. What if Malala made the Serbian film? Do I cancel Malala?
Yeah, we have a very sick relationship with celebrities,
With
That's
media and art and artists.
It is not good.
No, I mean, but also in some way, Bill Murray capitalized on that, I think.
I think you're right.
I think his
with the
movies
assessment.
are capitalizing on that in a way that most comedians aren't. where it's like, he knows he's like that he's kind of a meme, and he's been propagating that meme for a pretty long time, and he's sort of made comedies in that direction for a pretty long time.
And serious films in that direction, like Lost in Translation is also a response to his storied history. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, so his movies are a little closer to who he is, I think, than like Jim Carrey, or I'll keep picking artists out of a hat. But yeah,
well, we don't know.
Miller.
We only know the stories that were told and people's opinions. I don't know. I think everyone has to kind of design the line for themselves. And when we talk about like his contribution specifically to Groundhog Day, that suited, you mentioned like Stripes or like Ghostbusters. That may be just Bill Murray's deal. And it's interesting. We don't talk about a lot how the 80s were like. You go back and you watch some of those movies and you're like, oh, that sucks. Or just the general observation that some of these movies, the comedy was mostly just be an asshole at people. And yeah, comedy changes. But it's interesting that that's almost like, I think in that decade, we particularly had to reckon with that. Like, I think comedy is almost always a response to the decade it's in or the generation that it's in. And that's something that I think that's why Bill Murray was particularly evocative, was because he kind of represented that zeitgeist a little bit, or I like to think so.
I like to think so too. I realize part of my nostalgia about this movie is that like I love that a comedy can try to tell a story this optimistic. Like I actually think Groundhog Day is very optimistic in a lot of ways. Not so much and you get the girl in the end part of it, but in the you become
a better person.
Yeah, you can shed the selfishness.
Yeah. Right. That's good. The Siddhartha of it all.
Yeah, and I mean I think that's really cool that a comedy can do that meaningfully, because most comedies don't, or they don't try, and even if they did try, it would feel like sort of false morality or parody or whatever. And this movie's like spot on, and it's still really funny. And it's funny in a filmmaking level, by the way. Like we haven't talked about that at all, but like every single piece of walla or background music, or like every sound effect, every repeated shot,
kind of a joke.
Oh, and they're fucking awesome. Like the polka song at Gobbler's Knob. The polka song is like so funny. It's like that.
Let's have a family outing at Gobbler's Knob, the sexiest town center in America.
But
I fucking love
like
that
every
so
time
much.
you hear that song, you laugh your ass off. Like, and it gets fun. Like it's just the right amount of stupid that you laugh more every time you hear it. It's like
a little bit.
And there's so much of that
infectious
in this movie. Like the weird song in the German restaurant. You know what I mean? Like the guy with the beers that keeps like pivoting into the scene every time. It's fucking awesome.
The editing is pretty on point. There's a lot of montages. I could talk at length, and I won't, just about how montages are the unlock to audiences feeling like, this is fun.
100%.
That totally makes this movie, because this movie is like, I don't know, 60%, 70% montage.
Can you imagine how fun it would have been to make this movie independent of the Bill Murray stuff, where you're just like, okay, we're literally shooting this one shot all day, and we're getting 5 scenes out of it. You know what I mean? Like, and how fun that kind of is to do. Like that's
break the clock in a different way.
It's so great. Like that would be such a delight. Also,
it's definitely.
I just want to add one more thing. I think one of my favorite like screenplay moments ever in a movie is the old guy who's dying at the corner of this movie that we pass by 1,000 times. And never Pop. And we never really think about him until the right moment in the story when like we're really ready for a big change, and there he is. Like it's such a great like hiding in plain sight thing for a screenwriter to do, and I just love that, like when it really really works, and I like aspire to think of like how can I put something that's been waiting in plain sight the whole time that really pays off in the third act. Like all screenwriters dream of that, and I just feel like that's one of the best ones that I can think of. off the top of my dome.
Yeah, and it's a heartbreaking moment, and also perfectly cast. That guy is like the saddest man. I want to save him.
Yeah, totally. You know, but also you want to not look at him the whole. You know what I mean? Like for the first 2/3 of the movie, you want to ignore him.
Right.
You know, like it's perfect in that way. Are we ready to choose between open doors and figure out who gets left behind and who the
I
asshole
think we
is?
might.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
I like the conversation.
Yeah, it's been great.
Swaim, you got any final bars?
One actor who had a hand in this movie you might not know is Michael Shannon.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, we didn't
WrestleMania,
even
baby.
mention the WrestleMania.
It was in
of it
fact
all.
his film debut.
Yeah. Oh really?
Mhm.
I didn't know
Go
that.
look for him.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Yes, you.
Yeah.
Yes, you.
WrestleMania.
I do want to mention before we go that because it's just in my notes and it's like a thing that I noticed only this time watching it. There is only one scene, and it's actually kind of we maybe should have talked about it, but the morgue scene.
Yeah.
We see that time continues when Phil dies.
Yes, that's right. It does.
Which is quite an implication.
Yeah.
I don't need to I don't think I think it was one of those things where they just needed the scene and they didn't care about what that means to the reality of the, you know, like how the time loop works or whatever. But it means that maybe he's not the purpose of the time loop. I don't know. There's just a lot. That's just a weird thing that I noticed. That's like, I think probably just a writing inconsistency, and that's fine. And we can all just say it's okay.
Well, they also
It had to exist.
at some point they had a reason why the time loop started, right? Like
Or-
not
well,
not
it
in
doesn't
the movie.
explain any
No,
of
no,
it.
but like,
Oh,
it didn't
yeah,
make it in the movie.
originally. That's
They
right.
filmed it.
Danny Rubin's version.
I think they filmed it.
Oh,
Yeah, I
really?
think there was like a lightning striking thing, like because of the storm, and they were like trying to like give a magic justification for it, and they ended up cutting it out. If I've read correctly, that's why the storm is important. Other than just keeping him there, like it's also the catalyst.
Yeah, it's God putting his finger
Yeah.
on the earth.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, I think it's better without it. It makes you go.
Me too. I agree.
I
with
don't
that.
need to think about it, and
I don't need the mechanism.
and you can focus on other things. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's close the wormhole, baby. This is the section where we take the rules of this universe and decide for ourselves if we're either going to hybridize this world with our world, if we're going to go just live in the world of Groundhog Day,
Mm.
we're going to close this loop and move on to the next. We don't like it.
Or
Fuck this
keep
world.
it if we love it that much.
Yeah, keep or delete
Yeah.
or synthesize,
synthesize.
for your ship heads out there. How do you feel, Adam?
I gotta tell you, the simpler times of the '90s are very appealing. Like living in a Pennsylvania that doesn't terrify me as a voting population. It's like,
Right.
oh, that's not so bad. No, I'm gonna delete it because I think I think the Buddha was right in this respect, at least, that a repeated existence without change, where it was inescapable, is horrifying. You know, that is a horrifying predicament. A existence with reincarnation where we never escape the same time loops. That's scary, and I don't want to live like that. So I would delete this.
I would also close it just because I don't want to. It's terrifying to me that you can find these, gravity wells just pop up and do this to you. I mean,
Yeah.
it would have a lot of fun,
that's
but
scary.
he did kill himself probably like 10,000
Yeah, a
times.
lot of times.
So, like, there was some deep darkness, and I don't think I could take that. I think I'm just gonna watch anime.
Some of those deaths were pretty gnarly too. Like the car falling off the cliff and then blowing up was pretty gnarly. Not a fun way to go. Anyway, Swaymo?
As for me, I'm staying here, and the reason's
Yeah.
oh so clear. Rhyming is super fun, and I'm not even happy that I'll soon be done. I
Nice.
wish I could do this pod forever and ever and rhyme. Oh, God, it's just a shame that I have to say bye. boy, howdy, do I.
Time to die.
Time to die.
Top tier. Mike.
Boy, howdy.
S
Bravo.
tier
die.
bullshit.
Fucking bravo,
Fuck
dude.
this episode forever. Never rhyming again.
I love that you did it.
Intentionally or incidentally.
He's stuck
I
with
know.
it. The
I
man's
love
a
that you did it.
genius.
I really do.
Too bad we're gonna have to kill
Like
him.
that's shit that I think of when it's my turn to be the asshole. I think of this. I'm like, oh, what if I did
And go,
Dr. Seuss?
I'm not gonna
like,
do that.
absolutely
Oh, yeah.
fucking not.
yeah.
Not-
Absolutely
how about if I
not.
just
And then
say
I don't
boy,
have a
howdy
different-
100 times? How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know?
What a stupid podcast.